You can't just throw around accusations like that, my dad very energetically defended our neighbors. You can't just suspect the poor people living around here of thievery without having any proof against them. That's defamation. You know the eighth commandment. You are not to bear false witness against your neighbor. Sometimes I think it should also be, you are not to bear false assumptions against your neighbor. And now I don't want to hear a single word about your detective games anymore. He didn't get a chance to ban us from undertaking further investigations or visiting the neighbors we suspected, as Bubblegum, who'd been the only one to look out the window during this conversation, suddenly called, "It's snowing!" Translated into adult speech, he obviously meant to say, "It's snowing," and truly the sky was overflowing with thick white flakes. The fresh snow turned the landscape that had been previously ruined footsteps and cart tracks back into a homogeneous white surface. And since we'd been mostly done eating anyway, all that was left were really two small, slightly burned pancakes. We all sat in front of the window and marveled at the snow falling from above. That one song had a point. The snow did flutter silently. Hail and rain made their lot of noise when hitting ground, where the snowflakes contented themselves with a silent landing. Maybe that's why I liked snow better than rain, even though I usually preferred loud things. At least you didn't have to tell the snow, "Be quiet." It did that all by itself. "I need to make another visit," said my dad after he'd helped cleaning the table. "See you later. I'll be back in maybe an hour." The three of us waved him off. Aside from the chocolate he occasionally brought from his visits, we had little care for my dad's work and just kept watching the snow fall from a slowly darkening sky. After a bit, it might have been 2 minutes, we were very suddenly, very unpleasantly disturbed by my dad's calling from the hallway. "What on earth happened to my shoes? I need to go and there isn't a single shoe to be found." What do I care about my dad's shoes? He's old enough to look after them himself. I started joking, but then we all simultaneously clapped our hands over our mouths because we all suddenly remembered just what had happened to the local pastor's footwear. All of his shoes were still outside and probably completely snowed in by now. Kai and Louise nudged me to say something to help my dad out a little. I wasn't happy about that at all, but I yelled, "I don't know exactly where your shoes are, but I saw this one heap in front of your office window that looked suspiciously like a pile of shoes." "And how did the shoes migrate from the hallway into the snow, if I may ask?" my dad ranted on. "Did our thief get bored of stealing money and switched over to footwear or what?" We heard the back door open and close, and we all looked at each other, knowing that my dad had to wade through several meters of snow to get to his equally snowed-in shoes. Lucky for us, he was too good-natured to make much of a fuss about it. Surely he figured that we children had just taken the shoes outside for a game. I just hoped that he was at least wearing a warm pair of socks. Kai looked over to me and Louise and said quietly and with pity in his voice, "And maybe next time we go on playing detective, we put the shoes back into the hallway ourselves." Louise and I nodded in agreement. As much as we didn't care too much about my dad's work, none of us wished for him to catch a cold this short before Christmas because he had to bike through the snow without shoes on. Chapter 8, in which we learn a thing or two about our neighbors. Janine was done doing the dishes, meaning she wasn't done, but had one half of the dishes stacked onto the drying rack while the remaining plates had been left to soak in the sink. She put an ADAC magazine in front of Bubblegum, who snatched it up and began to flick through the pages, mesmerized by the different cars. And the way I knew him, he would keep doing this, even as the magazine itself was tattered and drooled on beyond recognition. He'd keep reading it even when he was sat on his potty, though sooner or later he always got a new one. Before, my dad used to just throw them away, No, they had an avid reader who studied each and every magazine in great detail. For us older children, Janine had put out a massive box of Lego bricks onto the big carpet in the kitchen, and luckily neither of us was in any way opposed to playing Lego. Soon we'd agreed on what we wanted to build. We'd come up with a plan to recreate the entire parsonage on top of the 4 base plates we had. We figured that having a true-to-scale 3D map of our crime scene would be helpful for our detective work sooner or later. Can we get a folding rule? I asked Janine, who by now had sat down on the couch to read a magazine herself. There's one in the basket out by the window, she droned a little suspiciously. Just make sure to put it back when you're done playing. Janine might be pretty young and act more like a peer than an adult from time to time, but the longer she seemed to live with Dad, the more she seemed to switch over completely to the adult side. Just that, for example, was such a typical thing an adult would say. Put it back when you're done. It wasn't like we children planned to leave things laying around the house or outside of it. We just forgot occasionally, and it wasn't really our fault that things didn't return to their original place on their own. We took the folding rule and putting it back, or at least not actively stopping it from returning itself, firmly on all our to-do lists and started scurrying around the house to take our measurements. We documented our results on a piece of cardboard so we would faithfully recreate them in Lego bricks. Starting in the basement, we worked our way up through the ground and second floor and finally ended up in the attic. Back in the kitchen, always keeping an eye on our notes, we started picking out the necessary bricks from the massive box of Legos. Janine kept looking over the edge of her newspaper, checking if Bubblegum showed any signs of needing to go to bed. But he was busy browsing through his ADAC magazine for the 3rd time and seemed very lively for it. He had also discovered an old biscuit from underneath the couch and started using it as a chewing toy. Janine gave him a sharp once-over to see if it was an actual biscuit or at least something edible, and didn't pay attention to age or quality.